day and welcome back to British Report. Imagine, if you will, being handed the keys to the national checkbook, promising everyone that the adults are back in the room, and then proceeding to spend money like a lottery winner with a 48-hour deadline and a very expensive taste in champagne. We are witnessing a fiscal car crash of epic proportions, and at the steering wheel, wearing a look of mild bewilderment, is our Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. This morning, the latest borrowing figures dropped like a lead balloon in a library, revealing that the UK has hit a record high for borrowing outside of a global pandemic. Despite taxing the British public until our eyes are watering and our pockets are turned inside out, Rachel Reeves has managed to oversee a borrowing spree that would make a shopaholic blush. We are talking about £132 billion in just the first 8 months of the financial year. It is a mathematical mystery, a financial fiasco, and according to some of the sharpest tongues in Westminster, it is proof that the current occupant of number 11 might just be completely out of her depth. We are not just looking at a black hole anymore, we are looking at a fiscal abyss, and the only solution being offered is to keep digging. Quick favour, if you are loving this fast-paced, sharp-edged look into the chaos currently tearing through Westminster, hit that subscribe button and click the notifications bell icon. Over 92% of viewers haven't yet. It is free, takes a second, and means the world to us. Thanks, if you did. Now back to the show, because the numbers coming out of the Treasury today are frankly terrifying. Let us dive headfirst into the radioactive core of these disastrous figures. According to the Office for National Statistics, public sector net borrowing between April and November hit a staggering £132 billion. To put that into perspective, that is £10 billion higher than the same period last year. Now remember, we were told by this Labour government that the Conservatives had left a mess and that stability was the new watchword. Well, if this is stability, I would hate to see what a crisis looks like. What is even more damning is that this figure is £16.8 billion higher than what the Office for Budget Responsibility, the supposed gold standard of economic forecasting, predicted back in March. Imagine going to your bank, telling them you need a £1,000 loan, and then showing up a few months later, having spent $11,600 and asking for a new credit card. You would be laughed out of the branch, yet this is the level of forensic economic management we are currently being subjected to. The transition from fiscal responsibility to reckless abandon has been swifter than a London pigeon spotting a discarded chips carton. The Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, did not pull any punches this morning, describing the figures as even more reckless spending by a Labour Party that seems to think the national debt is just a high score they are trying to beat. Stride pointed out the glaringly obvious: Labour chose to pile up even higher debt in their recent budget while simultaneously scrapping the two-child benefit cap and abandoning welfare reform. It is the economic equivalent of trying to lose weight by eating a triple-decker burger but switching to Diet Coke. You are ignoring the structural issues while indulging in the very habits that caused the problem in the first place. By refusing to tackle the spiralling welfare bill, Reeves is essentially heaping costs onto the next generation while weakening the economy today. But wait, the critique gets even sharper when you look at the perspective from Reform UK. Richard Tice has been vocal this morning, accusing Rachel Reeves of bankrupting Britain. His assessment was short, sharp and brutal: spending and debt out of control, growth zero and jobs falling. It is a trifecta of failure. When you have record high taxes, the highest burden on the British public in 70 years, and you are still borrowing record amounts, it suggests that the problem isn't a lack of revenue, it is a total inability to control spending. It is like having a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom. It doesn't matter how much water you pour in if the hole is getting bigger by the day. Reeves seems to believe that the solution to a spending problem is simply to find more people to tax, but even the ONS stats show that this strategy is hitting a brick wall. Now let us talk about the good news that the government is trying to spin. There was a slight dip in borrowing for the month of November specifically, down to £11.7 billion, which is the lowest for any November in 4 years. The Treasury was out in force this morning, patting themselves on the back as if they had just discovered fire. But here is the catch, and it is a big one. The ONS made it crystal clear that this dip was only possible because of the higher tax burden levied on hard-working Britons. As Tom Davis, a senior ONS statistician, pointed out, the main reason for the drop was increased receipts from taxes and national insurance contributions. In other words, the government isn't spending less, they are just taking more of your money to cover their tracks. It is not fiscal discipline, it is legalized plunder, and even with that extra cash, the overall borrowing for the financial year remains significantly higher than last year. This brings us to the dumb factor that has been circulating in the more heated corners of the political commentary world. When we say a policy is dumb, we are talking about a fundamental lack of common sense. Rachel Reeves has positioned herself as the Iron Chancellor, Yet her first major act was to surrender to union pay demands without getting any productivity reforms in return. She claimed she had to fix the foundations, yet she is building a house of cards on a foundation of debt. To tax the very businesses that create jobs through the national insurance hike, while complaining about low growth, is the height of economic illiteracy. It is like clipping a bird's wings and then shouting at it for not flying high enough. The wealth creators are being punished, the working people are being squeezed, and the national debt is soaring. If that isn't the definition of a failing policy, I don't know what is. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, tried to offer a defence this morning that was about as sturdy as a wet paper bag. He insisted that every penny of taxpayers' money should be spent wisely. He then dropped a terrifying statistic. 1 in every £10 we spend goes on debt interest. Think about that. 10% of everything you pay in tax, your VAT, your income tax, your national insurance, is effectively being thrown into a fire just to pay the interest on the money this government and its predecessors have borrowed. That is money that could be going to the NHS, to schools, or to fixing the potholes that are currently large enough to have their own postcodes. Murray claims the budget was designed to cut debt and borrowing, but the actual figures from the ONS suggest the exact opposite is happening. They are talking about cutting debt, while the debt clock is spinning faster than a centrifuge. Let us transition to the human cost of this borrowing binge. When a government borrows £132 billion in 8 months, it isn't just a number on a spreadsheet, it is a mortgage on the future of every child in this country. It keeps interest rates higher for longer, meaning your mortgage repayments stay high and your rent continues to climb. It fuels inflation, making the weekly shop feel like a luxury outing. Rachel Reeves promised change, but the only thing changing is the size of the national debt and the depth of the public's despair. The Conservative savings plan, a £47 billion reduction in spending, was dismissed by Labour as austerity. But as the saying goes, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. If you think spending cuts are hard, try a total sovereign debt crisis, where the international markets decide they no longer want to fund the British lifestyle. The calls for her resignation aren't just coming from the usual suspects on the opposition benches, they are starting to bubble up from the disillusioned public, who feel they were sold a pup. We were told there would be no tax rises on working people, yet the national insurance hike on employers is a direct tax on jobs and wages. We were told the black hole was £22 billion, yet the borrowing figures are nearly £17 billion over the OBR's already pessimistic forecasts. Either the Chancellor didn't know the numbers, which suggests incompetence, or she did know them and didn't tell us, which suggests something much worse. In any other profession, if you missed your performance targets by £17 billion in 8 months, you wouldn't be getting a promotion, you would be getting your P45 and a cardboard box for your desk plants. There is a relatable analogy here that simplifies the whole mess. Imagine a family that earns £3,000 a month but spends £5,000. To fix this, they decide to demand a raise from their boss, taxing the public, and they get an extra £500. But instead of using that £500 to pay off their credit card, they decide to buy a brand new car and sign up for a 5-star gym membership they don't use. Irresponsible spending. By the end of the year, despite their higher income, they are deeper in debt than ever before. That is the Rachel Reeves economy. She has increased the income through tax raids, but her spending has grown even faster. It is a spiral of decline that can only end in one of two ways: a massive, painful correction or total bankruptcy. Richard Tice's comment about bankrupting Britain might sound hyperbolic to some, but look at the trend. Growth is flatlining. The ONS recently revised growth figures downwards, and business confidence is at a low ebb following the budget. Why would a business invest in the UK when the Chancellor has signalled that they are the primary target for future tax raids? Why would a young person stay in the UK when 10% of their taxes are going to pay off the interest on a debt they didn't create? The golden economic rule that the Tories are touting to reduce the deficit and cut borrowing might seem like old-fashioned common sense, but in the current climate, common sense feels like a radical revolutionary idea. The forensic Keir Starmer and his Iron Chancellor are currently presiding over a fiscal meltdown that they seem unable to explain, let alone fix. When James Murray says they are entirely focused on spending wisely, it sounds like a hollow platitude in the face of a £132 billion borrowing bill. If they were spending wisely, the borrowing wouldn't be £10 billion higher than last year. If they were spending wisely, the OBR wouldn't be £16.8 billion off the mark. The reality is that Labour has opened the spending taps to satisfy their ideological projects and their union paymasters, and they are expecting the British taxpayer to foot the bill for the deluge. As we wrap this up, the question remains, how much longer can Rachel Reeves stay in her post while the numbers continue to scream failure? A Chancellor who cannot forecast correctly, cannot control spending, and cannot generate growth despite record-high taxes is a Chancellor who has lost the confidence of the markets and the people. The news host critiques are getting louder because the reality is becoming impossible to ignore. We are being told to prepare for difficult times, but it seems the most difficult thing for this government is basic arithmetic. Whether she is dumb or simply ideological is a matter for debate, but the results are the same: a country that is borrowing more, taxing more, and growing less. The enough is enough sentiment is growing. From the farmers in the streets to the businesses looking for the exit, the message to Rachel Reeves is clear: the current path is unsustainable. If the adults are indeed back in the room, it is time they started acting like it, or they should step aside for someone who actually knows how to balance a checkbook without bankrupting a nation. The British public deserves a chancellor who prioritizes the next generation over the next spending spree, and based on this morning's disastrous figures, Rachel Reeves is simply not that person. Thank you so much for watching.